A question that is often asked is, what is Disneyland going to do with Tomorrowland? Why is that? Well, it's just not very tomorrow, for one. It's become more of an amalgamation of science fiction related IPs that Disney owns. You got Star Wars, Buzz Lightyear, sometimes Marvel. Somehow Finding Nemo got in there. And this has left a lot of Disneyland fans wanting something better for Tomorrowland. And for some, this means not something new, but the return of something old. Many fans wish for the return of Adventure Thru Innerspace. And in this episode of Fresh Baked, we'll look back at this beloved attraction from Tomorrowland's past. So why do so many wish to see Adventure Thru Innerspace return? Well, maybe it would be a return, in some ways, to a more positive, forward-thinking view of science and technology rather than the land's current focus on science fiction. Because that's where we were at the time of its creation in 1967. Leading up to this, Walt had wanted to create a new Tomorrowland, understanding that no sooner had he built it, had it become a sort of yesterland. What was future was now past, and Walt wanted Tomorrowland to keep up. And like most expansion projects at Disneyland, this new Tomorrowland was quite an ambitious project at first. As suggested, these new plans for Tomorrowland were already in the works by 1957, just 2 years after the park opened, and were to be part of an even greater expansion into other lands like Liberty Street, which was the forerunner to Hall of Presidents at Walt Disney World and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln here, and Edison Square, which was the forerunner to Carousel of Progress. And then there was the third land, Science Land, and this was to become a home to Adventures Thru Innerspace and a lot more. The land would have been built roughly where Space Mountain is today, and would have included a time travel attraction that would take guests back to the age of dinosaurs. And if you've ever wondered why there is a dinosaur diorama randomly included in the middle of Disneyland Railroad as you pass through Tomorrowland, well, there's your answer. There was also to be an exhibit featuring motors and gears sponsored by GM, a new outer space attraction featuring space exploration and colonization, and a micro-world attraction originally called the Protozoa Ride, the latter of which one could assume evolved into Adventures Thru Innerspace. All of that was eventually reduced to just Innerspace. As Monsanto was already the sponsor of the attraction that preceded Innerspace, the Monsanto Hall of Chemistry, they were a natural fit to sponsor the new attraction. Walt, his Imagineers, and the Monsanto Company worked closely together to develop a theme for this new ride. For Monsanto's part, they wanted an attraction that embodied the benefits of hard science and how it affected us directly. At the time, the world of outer space was getting a lot of attention with the Apollo missions. In fact, the president of Monsanto, Dr. Charles Allen Thomas, was quoted as saying, "The astronaut in his spacesuit may cut a more glamorous figure than the scientist in his lab coat, but we're hoping the excitement generated in our attraction by the creativity of many Disney artists will bring alive the excitement of inner space." The Disney team had lobbied for a subject that was simple and easy to digest for the common guest, a drop of water. Monsanto, however, wanted something more relatable to their business, like one of their man-made polymers. But eventually both sides agreed that synthetic polymers were probably a little too complex for the average guest, nor would they even care about them in any way. Water, though, is common to everyone, making it easy for all guests to relate to the science that goes around it. It was then decided that the most artistic way to represent water was with a snowflake. And so production began on Adventure Thru Innerspace, and it was all hands on deck with Disney legends. Concept art and building exterior by John Hench. Principal design was by Claude Coates and Ed Johnson. Script by Ex Atencio. Narration by Paul Frees. Ride vehicles by Roger Brogy, Burt Brundage, and Bob Gurr. Visual and special effects by Yale Gracie. Exterior mural designs by Mary Blair, and the title song, Miracles from Molecules, was by the Sherman Brothers. Now, I ran those off kind of casually, but that is a literal who's who of Disney legends. Adventures Thru Innerspace opened on August 5th, 1967, almost a year after Walt Disney's death in 1966. It was originally a free ride for all adults during the ticket book days. Kids could ride free once with a parent and with a coupon found in the ticket book. Additional rides were a seat ticket, and then it eventually became a seat ticket for everyone in December of 1972. The Claude Coates design was to use sight and sound rather than animatronics and set pieces in order to bring guests into the microscopic world. This was necessary due to the subject matter of the attraction. The intent of the attraction did not lend itself to singing bears or things of that nature. So using lights, sound, and projected images provided by Yale Gracie and two sources of narration, the resultant show was perhaps more surreal, more unreal than perhaps they had anticipated. Guests continued to shrink as they progressed through the attraction, and the sense of danger increased as well. Guests were to feel that they were on the verge of shrinking from existence. Our experience goes from a fascinating up-close look of a snowflake to a labyrinthine exploration of that snowflake in microscopic detail. We're no longer grounded in its familiar shape, but rather lost in the sort of bizarre-looking molecules and atoms. This surreal feeling was heightened by an amazing piece of narration by Paul Frees from a script written by Exitencio.
Once you have passed beyond the limits of normal
magnification.
Frees' comments are delivered as though they are our own subconscious minds talking to ourselves. And if they sound familiar, it's because they very much echo his narration for Haunted Mansion.
Is this haunted room actually stretching?
And still I continue to shrink. What compelling force draws me into this mysterious darkness?
And that, in large part, kind of describes the story of this attraction, and ironically reinforced the idea that science was getting kind of scary. An idea that Monsanto had hoped to counter with the attraction. Monsanto wanted guests to see the benefits, the positives of science, but the final product was surreal and otherworldly, and for many downright scary. And we haven't even gotten into the somewhat terrifying image of guests being visibly shrunken through the mighty microscope, an image to this day I remember scaring the heck out of me. The mighty microscope, designed by George McGinnis, became something of a star in itself. Its dominating presence in the queue was the focus of everyone's attention. Guests would board their automobiles, enter the microscope, and by all appearances shrink right before everyone's very eyes. It was a very convincing illusion for kids. So here we are looking at this impressive microscope, and sometimes we kind of overlook a rather humorous paradox. How is it that a thing that is meant to make small things larger, a microscope, is supposed to make us smaller than an atom? It's the opposite of a microscope's intended function. But there was more to the queue than just the microscope. There was the giant snowflake that served as a map of sorts, the blinking lights indicating where all the various guests were within the snowflake. Meanwhile, down on the ground level in the queue, there were signs giving guests a little background into what they were about to experience. For example, that all solid matter is actually quite porous. And our adventure would prove that out as we're able to microscopically navigate between these molecules. And by the way, if this queue looks familiar, no doubt it's because it is now the queue for Star Tours as we ride today. They changed very little with regard to its design. Now instead of a snowflake, there's the flight board, and instead of the mighty microscope, there's a Star Tours vehicle. And if you look closely, you might also recognize one of those signs that we saw before, giving us background on our Adventure Thru Innerspace. One of those signs was repurposed as the bag check monitor found in the Star Tours queue. And this is where we find one of the most important innovations in the history of not just Disneyland, but perhaps in themed entertainment, the Automobile, or perhaps better known today as the Omniboober. It was born of Disney's now famous involvement in the New York World's Fair. They borrowed the endless chain concept found at the General Motors exhibit. Gurr & Company wanted to enhance this concept and did so by adding different viewpoints rather than the fixed view of the GM attraction. As Bob Gurr relates the story, his inspiration came from a candied apple he found in John Hench's office. He picked up the apple by its stick and twirled it around in his fingers, around in circles. And that gave him the idea to rotate the automobile on its axis. They could pivot the ride on its fixed axis while also being able to spin it around left and right, as well as leaning it backward when going up a hill. This innovation now gave Imagineers the opportunity to completely control the guest experience. Guests would be pointed in any direction the storytellers chose. And perhaps more importantly, the constantly moving train of ride vehicles combined with the ease in which guests boarded them allowed Disney to cycle more than 2,000 guests per hour. It was a win in every measurable way. So great was it that it even changed the course of history for the Haunted Mansion. As we all know, the Haunted Mansion was originally intended to be a walkthrough attraction, but these plans were quickly changed with the innovation made at Innerspace. Today we can even see it at Buzz Lightyear, Ariel's Undersea Adventure, or the Finding Nemo attraction at Disney World. Once inside the attraction, guests were taken through a labyrinth-like tour of a molecule, swirling crystals and molecules seemingly all around you. and the effect was achieved through direct projections. Projections! In 1967, they were using projections. Now, these were provided by Yale Gracie, and he also used some old school techniques like reflections and physical etchings on glass. Once guests safely completed their journey, the somber, dangerous tone of the attraction transformed to a much happier one with the title song, Miracles from Molecules, from the Sherman Brothers. Hearing it in combination with the post-show was intended to allow guests to sort of reorient themselves to their normal surroundings, both physically, you're full size now, and emotionally. And if the song sounds familiar, again, it's possibly due to how similar it was to A Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, also written by the Sherman Brothers for the Carousel of Progress in Tomorrowland. After many years of success initially, attendance eventually started to fade, and in 1977, Monsanto ended their sponsorship of the attraction. 8 years later, in 1985, Adventures Thru Innerspace closed for good and was replaced by Star Tours. In addition to the Q sign that we mentioned earlier, used as the baggage scanner at Star Tours, guests could find other references to Adventures Thru Innerspace in the Star Tours attraction over the years. For example, you might have seen the mighty Microscope on screen as your Star Speeder exits a tunnel in the Death Star. Adventures Thru Innerspace has been gone for more than 30 years now, and some fans are asking for it back when Tomorrowland gets its eventual makeover. But maybe that nostalgia we feel for it isn't so much for the ride itself, but because it's the last remnant of Walt's original vision of Tomorrowland. That is, a place where guests can actually learn something about science and technology. Certainly, none of that is happening at Tomorrowland today. But the question remains, why did it fade? We think back on Innerspace with nostalgia, but something must have been missing for it to have gone away in the first place. Maybe the reason Innerspace failed is for a reason that we're all too familiar with today. One could argue that it didn't have the same charm that so many other classic Disneyland attractions had or have. Certainly it doesn't rank up there with Pirates or Haunted Mansion. Heck, even dark rides like Mr. Toad's and Snow White have endured and resonated with fans for years. Maybe Adventures Thru Innerspace failed in the long run because its design was not one of art first. It was born of a desire to create synergy, and not even synergy with an IP, which is the issue we face today, but synergy with a sponsor. And when you start the creative process in this way, it is doomed. And frankly, I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did. But of course, that is a testament to the genius of Imagineers like Yale Gracie, Claude Coates, Ex Atencio, Bob Gurr, Roger Broggie, among many others. Which is why I would say that Adventures Thru Innerspace is probably best left where it is, in the world of nostalgia, in our hearts and in our memories, where it never fades or decays, and where it can never be threatened by the latest technology. In this way, Adventures Thru Innerspace can be considered a microcosm of Tomorrowland in general, where time is a threat to its relevance, but where the rest of Disneyland can live in the relative comfort of nostalgia. Thank you everyone for watching our video on the history of Adventures Thru Innerspace. We do hope you enjoy and ask everyone to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to our channel, and stay tuned for more. From Fresh Baked!
We've got lots more videos for you to see, so grab a churro and check out some of our other videos and have your mind blown by how much fun we're having. We truly are the best of Disney Baked Fresh Daily. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and we'll see you next time. Fresh Baked!